Scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, it feels like influencers are everywhere, a thoroughly modern invention, right? But what if I told you that the original influencers weren't crafting viral videos, but commanding royal courts, dazzling high society, and shaping empires centuries ago? And the recent Met Gala, it gave us a perfect glimpse into one fascinating branch of this long history, and it inspired me to make this video. I mean, I guess by now most of us have seen the looks from the Met Gala, whose theme this year was superfine tailoring black style. And we were both impressed by some choices. Personally, my favorite was Caleb McLaughlin. And we were also underwhelmed by other choices that seemed to disregard this incredible theme completely. I'm thinking of you, Shakira. Anyway, we were not impressed, were we? Okay, so this was one of the most interesting themes the Met Gala has had for a while, not only because it celebrates Black history and culture, but because Black dandyism is so interesting. In many ways, these dandies were the influencers of their time. They were also crafting a subversive identity that stood in sharp contrast to what a racist society expected of them. And this act of self-fashioning, this deliberate performance of identity to gain influence and challenge norms, isn't isolated to their story. So let's back up a bit. Let's connect a few dots. Let's talk about royal courts, dandies in Europe and in the United States, the art of performing the self, and how that shapes culture. Hello, lovely history fans. I'm Dr. Julia Martins, and I'm a historian, and this is Pancake, and he's a cat. Anyway, just a caveat, I'm not a dress historian, but I am interested in how fashion and culture shape each other and how fashion and luxury are connected to power. If you want a breakdown of Met Gala looks, this isn't the video for you. But if you are interested in what came before brand deals and influencer selfies with a luxury bag collection in the back, then you may enjoy this video. Consider it an invitation to learn more, and make sure to check out the reading recommendations and the resources below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to support the creation of more history videos like this, do consider joining my Patreon. I've recently started adding more content there, including exclusive Q&As for my Medici tier patrons and bonus videos for all supporters. So, today we're exploring how the modern influencer economy, with its curated personas, strategic networking, and monetization of lifestyle, has deep historical roots in royal courts, fashionable dandies, and intellectual salons. Because, while TikTok might be new, the human drive to perform status for gain certainly isn't. Imagine a world where your worth is measured by who follows the trends you set, where your carefully curated image directly translates to power and wealth, where one wrong move could see you publicly ostracized, cancelled, as it were. And I'm not describing your Instagram feed, I'm talking about the French court in Versailles. The court of Louis XIV at Versailles was perhaps history's most elaborate stage for the performance of status. Much like today's social media platforms, the court was a space where visibility equaled relevance, and relevance translated directly to power and wealth. Just think of aristocratic portraits, full of symbolism, commissioned at great expense, and strategically displayed to cement one's status. And now think of the meticulously posed selfie with the perfect lighting next to a luxury bag casually in the back, and brand deals with luxury fashion houses. They're simply the modern version of royal patronage. But of course, things were very different in the past. Before Louis XIV, many European countries had sumptuary laws. Laws meant to restrict who could buy and wear what in terms of textiles, colors, and jewelry. The main goal of these laws was arguably to keep people in their places in the social hierarchy, and while they were often not enforced, they served as a stark reminder of what was expected of people. Now, today we may associate France with luxury and fashion, but it wasn't always like this. Spain and Italy were renowned for their luxury products in the 16th and 17th centuries. But Louis XIV, along with his finance minister Jean-Baptiste Colbert, decided to significantly restrict the importation of these products and to encourage the development of luxury textiles made in France, such as silk. The king himself wore colorful and lavish clothes, and, of course, soon did his courtiers. At Versailles, proximity to the king was everything. Louis XIV understood this perfectly, and he weaponized it. As the Duke of Saint-Simon observed in his memoirs, he, the king, looked to the right and to the left, not only upon rising, but upon going to bed, at his meals, in passing through his apartments, or his gardens of Versailles, where alone the courtiers were allowed to follow him. He saw and noticed everybody. Not one escaped him, not even those who hoped to remain unnoticed. Now, if that doesn't sound like an influencer checking out who view their stories, I don't know what does. So the Sun King was brilliantly manipulative in how he maintained this system. Saint-Simon further noted, he was conscious that the substantial favors he had to bestow were not nearly sufficient to produce a continual effect. He had therefore to invent imaginary ones, and no one was so clever in devising petty distinctions and preferences which aroused jealousy and emulation. So essentially, Louis XIV created an entire economy of status symbols when he ran out of actual rewards to give. So not unlike the dopamine hit of likes and comments that keeps today's influencers and content creators posting even when the monetization is minimal, which is something I am well aware of. In any case, though, aristocrats acted as patrons to lace and wig makers, and there was even a magazine listing the best places to shop in Paris. By the time Louis XV became king, things were incredibly elaborate at court, from rituals to clothing and hairstyles. That's one of the reasons why the king's favorite mistress, Madame du Barry, caused such a scandal. She was constantly disregarding these rules and subverting the carefully constructed hierarchy of courtiers, which relied heavily on how they presented themselves to the world. And this went beyond France. For courtiers everywhere, appearance was paramount. Not just physical appearance, though that certainly mattered, but the appearance of effortless grace, wit, and refinement. Let's rewind a bit and hop over to Italy, as I can't talk about this subject without mentioning one of the most interesting books to read if you are interested in cultural history. In 1528, Baldassare Castiglione codified this effortless charm in the Book of the Courtier, advising the perfect courtier to practice in all things a certain sprezzatura, so nonchalance, so as to conceal all art and make whatever is done or said appear to be without effort and almost without any thought about it. If that makes you think of influencers going on about how to get the perfect no makeup look, or the Parisian I just got out of bed, didn't brush my hair and just applied red lipstick vibe, that is very much the vibe. So behavior mattered just as much as appearance. Giovanni della Casa warned in his 1558 Galateo of Manners and Behaviors that it is an ill noise to hear a man raise his voice high, like to a common crier. The implication being that truly important people don't need to announce their importance, which remains the cornerstone of all old money aesthetic content to this day. I mean, I can't help but think of the money talk wealth whispers that old money fashion influencers are constantly repeating. And while we roll our eyes at influencers unboxing their latest sponsorship haul, I mean, I certainly do, we are witnessing something that would have been perfectly understandable to a Renaissance courtier, the performance of status for social and economic gain, just with different tools at their disposal. As for social climbers, the 17th century also feels very similar to us in the present. Samuel Pepys' diary entry from 1660 demonstrates the personal significance of fashion as a status marker. He wrote, "This day I put on first my new silk suit, the first that ever I wore in my life." So for Pepys, this material acquisition marked a key milestone in his social ascent, just as acquiring certain luxury items, I'm thinking of Birkin bags and whatnot, serves as content milestones for today's lifestyle influences. And the enthusiasm for simply being near power? Consider Madame de Sévigné's gushing letter to her daughter in 1683. "I've returned from Versailles. I've seen these beautiful apartments. I'm charmed. Everything is grand, everything is magnificent, and the music and dance reach perfection. But what pleases me more than anything is to spend 4 entire hours with the king. It's enough to satisfy an entire kingdom that passionately loves to see their master." That's essentially a 17th century equivalent of OMG, just spent the whole evening at the same party as Beyonce. Hashtag blessed or hashtag living my best life. And if you think this is all about courtiers being frivolous, that's far from the truth. Court fashion shaped the economy, as with Louis XIV. Later, Marie Antoinette was to be the ultimate fashion icon. But let me introduce you to Marie-Jeanne Rose Bertin, who, thanks to the Queen, became one of the first celebrity fashion designers. And I know this video is full of anachronisms, but bear with me. Bertin was a milliner, and along with Marie Antoinette, they essentially made hats fashionable for women. Hats had always been worn, of course, but luxury headpieces for women tended to be much different from the hats worn and popularized by the Queen. Bertin became the Queen's unofficial Minister of Fashion, making Paris the epitome of luxury in fashion in the late 18th century. But as we know, this wouldn't last. The French Revolution was just around the corner. Marie Antoinette's very visibility and association with extravagance eventually fueled public anger. The court, and especially the Queen, symbolized luxury, and Marie Antoinette was blamed for the national debt and famine, everything that France was experiencing, although historians have pointed out that what she spent on clothes, even though it was a considerable amount, obviously, it was still in line with what was expected of a French queen at the time. Arguably, though, and ironically, one of the tipping points in this discourse was when Marie Antoinette decided to embrace simplicity. So she had read Enlightenment philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and she was fascinated with this idealized version of a rustic life. So she had a farm-like retreat made for her in Versailles, and she started the trend of dressing like a peasant, essentially, at court. Of course, that was completely tasteless and tone-deaf, given how real peasants lived. But it was also disastrous for the economy. Not only were many of these gauzes and muslins imported, but this also meant that the silk production in Lyon was deeply hit, and that meant that thousands of people were out of work. Now, the French Revolution is a giant topic, and of course there's much more to it, but this illustrates how fashion choices, even those intended to project simplicity, could have far-reaching economic consequences and profoundly shape public perception of power, for better or for worse. If courtiers were the original platform-dependent influencers, then the rise of the dandy marked a new kind of tastemaker. So, what exactly is a dandy? In essence, a dandy was a person, usually a man, who elevated fashion, who refined manners and a cultivated persona to an art form. It wasn't just about wearing expensive clothes. It was about meticulous self-creation, often to assert individuality, influence social circles, or even offer a subtle critique of societal norms. One of the most iconic of these figures, and a prime example of this independent image creator, was George Beau Brummell. In Regency England, Brummell, a man of relatively modest birth and limited wealth, achieved extraordinary social influence. His currency wasn't noble titles or vast estates, but entirely his carefully cultivated persona and revolutionary style. So instead of the flashy opulence common at the time, he promoted an understated elegance in men's fashion. Clean lines, perfect tailoring, and muted colors, essentially creating an early version of a minimalist aesthetic trend. Brummell understood that true influence comes from mastering the art of seeming effortless while concealing the enormous effort behind achieving this, that sprezzatura that Castiglione wrote about centuries earlier. So he would reportedly spend hours perfecting the knot of his cravat, only to emerge looking as though he had tied it with casual indifference. Brummell had studied at Eton and Oxford, and later he became a friend of the Prince of Wales, so he had access to very exclusive circles. Although he didn't come from an aristocratic background himself, he had a lot of privilege. And soon, like modern influencers who build their brand on exclusivity and taste-making, plus a few helpful connections, Brummell's power came from his ability to decide what and who was fashionable. His approval was currency in itself. He famously snubbed even the Prince Regent on occasion, demonstrating the remarkable power that his social capital afforded him. So when they first met and the prince ignored Brummell while saying hello to his friend standing next to him, Lord Alvanley, Brummell reportedly asked as the prince turned his back, but was still within earshot, "Alvanley, who's your fat friend?" There's nothing like 19th century fat phobia, is there? Eventually, though, his debts and excessively critical remarks got too much, and so he fled the country to escape his creditors. Brummell was a socialite, but he wasn't beloved by all, as you can imagine from this story. There's another story of him at a party at a gentleman's house, where he was definitely underwhelmed by the quality of the champagne served. Allegedly, he waited for a pause in the conversation, he raised his glass, and he asked loudly for some more of that cider. Ouch. He was very bitchy, I love it. But anyway, dandies were people who were, frankly, obsessed with being seen with the right people in the right clothes saying the right things. And humans have always found ways to commodify their public personas, long before anyone had heard of a ring light or an Instagram algorithm. According to the Victorian writer Thomas Carlyle, a dandy is a clothes-wearing man, a man whose trade, office, and existence consists in the wearing of clothes. Every faculty of his soul, spirit, person, and purse is heroically consecrated to this one object, the wearing of clothes, wisely and well, so that, as others dress to live, he lives to dress. I'm not sure that's fair. The French poet Charles Baudelaire wrote that the dandy should aspire to be uninterruptedly sublime. He should live and sleep in front of a mirror. Now, this idea of mirror is interesting because dandies require an audience, people who watch them and copy them, but their personas went beyond appearance. Both Oscar Wilde and Lord Byron were dandies in the sense of someone who creates an image to be consumed, and as people who write for the pleasure and entertainment of others. Not to mention that both writers were involved in scandals and gossip, which only added fuel to the fire. But let's get back to the Met Gala and black dandies, especially in the United States. As Susan Sontag wrote, detachment is the prerogative of an elite, and the dandy is the 19th century surrogate for the aristocrat in matters of culture. So dandyism was deeply connected to privilege, yes. But things were different for black dandies. For black dandies, there was an extra layer of subversion of the expected social hierarchy, a questioning of stereotypes, a reclaiming of identity, of fashion and luxury from people who had long been enslaved, oppressed, and, of course, excluded from fashionable society. The scholar Monica Miller writes of an 18th century black man who had been enslaved, Julius Soubise, but who later mixed with the London elite, wearing red-heeled shoes with diamond buckles. Meanwhile, another black man, Olaudah Equiano, who had bought his freedom, was spending a fortune on superfine clothes to dance and celebrate his freedom. And from what I understand, that's what the Met Gala was referencing with their theme, superfine. So black dandyism is inherently subversive, and therefore much cooler, at least to my eyes. I mean, after centuries of slavery, black dandies' embrace of perfectly tailored clothes, it was a statement against racist hierarchies and a reimagining of what masculinity could look like. So, if the key distinction between someone like Beau Brummell and courtiers of the past was that courtiers derived power from proximity to royal authority, and Brummell created his own authority through the performance of a superior taste and style, it's important to remember that he was still friends with the prince and he had access to exclusive spaces. Black dandies, on the other hand, were crafting and reimagining their personas in a world that did not welcome them. They were rewriting the rules of the fashion game. But if we're thinking of influence and connecting lots of different things here, let me tell you about another group of people who I am anachronistically going to call the original content curators, the Salonnières. If you've ever followed someone who excels at bringing together interesting guests on podcasts, curating distinctive collections, or building engaged communities around shared interests, you're witnessing the modern incarnation of the Salonnière tradition. Today's successful content curators, so those who don't necessarily create original material, but who excel at discovering, contextualizing, and connecting others' work, they are following in the footsteps of 18th and 19th century French women like Madame Geoffrin and Madame de Staël. Denied formal power in male-dominated institutions, these women created alternative centers of influence and learning through their salons. So think of them as the original community managers. They didn't need to be the most knowledgeable person in the room about philosophy or politics, though they often were. They didn't need to be incredible writers, though they often were too. I mean, Madame de Staël wrote that Men do not change, they unmask themselves. I love that sentence. She also wrote, intellect does not attain its full force unless it attacks power. I mean, that's brilliant. She was brilliant. But anyway, the Salonnières' unique skill was knowing exactly who to invite to their gatherings, how to facilitate productive conversations and inspiring discussions, but also how to redirect the conversation. So precisely what successful modern podcast hosts and community builders do today. Plus, the rise of literary salons in the late 18th century was deeply connected to the rise of tea, chocolate, and coffee houses. These beverages were increasingly popular among the elite, who enjoyed talking about politics, philosophy, and literature over a hot drink. Growing up, Madame de Staël had received an incredible education. She read many of the philosophers of her time, such as Rousseau, Diderot, and Montesquieu, and her mother, Madame Necker, hosted her own literary salon, which young Germaine, so Madame de Staël, attended. She even met Benjamin Franklin there. And later, she created her own salon. Madame de Staël hoped that the French Revolution would bring about a constitutional monarchy to France, following the model of England. Her salon was a meeting place for the constitutionals, which included Lafayette. But, as we know, the revolution went in a different direction very quickly. Madame de Staël left France for Switzerland. Later, she even moved to Sweden, and she hosted a fabulous literary salon there too. She reportedly hated Napoleon, and so did many others at the time. Her salon became an anti-Napoleon gathering place for exiled liberals, and people discussed everything from politics to culture and the latest in philosophy. Madame de Staël was arguably the greatest of the Salonnières, but she wasn't the only one. Madame Geoffrin was just as celebrated. As Jean-François Marmontel observed about Madame Geoffrin in his memoirs, her special skill was knowing how to attract talents of every kind, less perhaps for her own enjoyment than for the reputation that their assembly brought her. That's a bit cynical, but just look at this 1812 painting called In the Salon of Madame Geoffrin in 1755 by the French artist Anicet Charles Gabriel Lemonnier. We're decades before the French Revolution here in this scene, but the painting was made during the Napoleonic era. You can see many of the Enlightenment writers gathered to read Voltaire and to discuss new ideas. Of course, you can tell that this is an idealized version of the past, of what life was supposedly like before the French Revolution. And you can't help but notice that, while there are a few women present, notably the hostess, this is still a male-dominated world. Women hosted and frequented salons, and historians have argued that these salons provided a learning space for them, as they were barred from access to many institutions of learning. Madame Geoffrin's salon embodied the exchange of ideas in the Enlightenment. She even had specific days for artists and other days for writers to come, to meet each other and to hold interesting discussions for the benefit of those present. I recently came across this incredible quote about Madame Geoffrin in the 2020 fantasy novel The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. They will not remember you, of course, but ideas are so much wilder than memories, so much faster to take root. So we still have this idea that her main contribution was to bring people together and allow ideas to be shared. So it's similar to when someone hosts a popular roundtable discussion or creates a successful collaborative series that enhances their own brand through strategic association with other creators. The modern parallel even extends to monetization strategies as well. While courtiers sought direct patronage and dandies capitalized on their taste-making abilities, Salonnières, like today's community-focused creators, often profited in less direct ways. Many of them came from elite backgrounds, but their main currency was information, connection, and access. The financial benefits came through the networks that they built and the reputational capital that they accrued rather than direct payments. So this approach to influence, building authority not necessarily through direct demonstrations of personal expertise, but through highlighting, contextualizing, and connecting the expertise of others, remains a fascinating model for learning. And it's interesting to note how most salons were run by women, and so many women thrive today in the world of content creation. So, what can these historical status performers teach us about our world today? First, that there's nothing particularly new about crafting a persona for public consumption and economic advantage. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this perfectly when he wrote in The Prince around 1513. Men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands, for everyone can see, but very few have to feel. Everybody sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you are, and those few will not dare to oppose themselves to the many, who have the majesty of the state to defend them. So Machiavelli also advised rulers, therefore, a prince must take great care that nothing goes out of his mouth which is not full of the above-named 5 qualities. And to see and hear him, he should seem to be all mercy, faith, integrity, humanity, and religion. Now, this could easily be rephrased as advice for maintaining a consistent brand image on social media. So the core dynamics remain remarkably consistent across centuries. The performance of a carefully constructed public persona, the accumulation of social capital through strategic visibility and association, and the conversion of that capital into tangible benefits, whether that's a royal pension or a sponsored post. What has changed is scale and access. Louis XIV's court encompassed perhaps thousands of people. Today's influencers reach millions. The barriers to entry at Versailles were nearly insurmountable for most. Today, in theory at least, anyone with a smartphone can attempt to build influence. But perhaps the most striking similarity is how both historical and modern status performers navigate this tension between authenticity and calculation. The most successful courtiers, dandies, salonnières, and influencers all master the art of appearing genuine while being strategic, that eternal sprezzatura that makes the enormously difficult look effortless. So, next time you roll your eyes at an influencer's apparently frivolous content, remember, they're playing one of humanity's oldest games, just with better lighting and more pixels. But going back to the Met Gala, I think there is much we can learn from this element of subversion, joy, and resistance to an inherently unfair society, as exemplified by Black dandies. We can create fun personas and have fun with fashion, yes, but it's particularly cool and powerful when fashion and image are used to question stereotypes and fight against racism in the process. So, while I have nothing against Shakira and the many other celebrities who chose inexplicable outfits to the Met Gala, I am frustrated that they missed out. They missed on the chance of learning and researching and being inspired by history. But, much to the Salonnières' joy, the incredible choice of theme of the Met Gala this year and the wonderful outfits that we saw got people talking. And people are not just talking about the outfits themselves, but what they represent, what they can tell us about race, gender, and class, especially with everything that has been happening in the US. Anyway, there's a lot more that could be said about these topics, and I only skimmed the surface here. Do check out the resource recommendations below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you could also consider becoming a patron over on Patreon, that would be great. I will be posting a lot more exclusive content on Patreon, and I would love for you to join my community there. Thank you, and see you next time.